So thanks everyone, good afternoon, and we're ready to get started. Welcome to the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada's Responsible Care webinar series for 2020. This is the first webinar of our new series, and we're very excited about it and pleased to have you join us today. My name is Aaron. I'm a policy analyst here at the association, and I'm sitting here in the Ottawa office with Bob Masterson, President and CEO of the CIAC. First, a little bit about the webinar series. The series is in response to the environmental landscape in Canada, which has been shifting dramatically in the past couple of years. Conversations around climate change, battles over pipelines, and Canada's emission footprint remains top of mind for many Canadians. So now, more than ever, we're concerned about the environmental threats we face every day. We want to know that the chemical plants in our neighborhoods are operating safely. We want to know that we are protected from the risks of transporting chemicals to our communities. We want to know more about the presence of chemicals found in the products we use every day. And understandably, Canadians want to know that the corporations are doing everything they can to solve the local and global challenges that face our society. Responsible care represents the chemistry industry's response to these growing societal concerns and the industry's commitment to sustainability. There will always be new challenges facing our industry, and we must continuously improve and develop new and innovative solutions to address them. So today we're excited to launch our Responsible Care webinar series for 2020. We will be hosting webinars throughout the year on a number of responsible care topics and projects that our members are proud to present. The hope is that by learning about the projects that our members and affiliates are showcasing, you will be inspired to take these lessons and apply them to your everyday operations and activities. So to start us off, we have our very own President and fearless leader, Bob Masterson. Bob Masterson joined CIAC in 2010 and was the former Vice President of Responsible Care. Under his leadership, RC enacted a new set of sustainability principles and guidelines for Canada's chemistry industry. He was previously Director of Regulatory Affairs with the Cement Association of Canada and spent 15 years as a consultant on environment and sustainability issues in a number of industry sectors, including forest products, electricity, cement, mining, and energy. Bob holds an engineering degree from Queen's University and a Master of Public Policy from Carleton University. So thank you for joining us. Before we start, a quick little bit of housekeeping. You have all been placed on mute for this webinar. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the question function on the sidebar. You can ask questions anytime, and there will be an opportunity at the end for questions, and I will take a look through them and read them aloud to Bob. The webinar will also be recorded, so if you missed anything or know of any colleagues of yours who didn't have a chance to join us today, they will have an opportunity to take a look at it later. So with that, Bob, please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. And I'm not scrolling down. Hang on. There we go. You don't need to see that. Here we go. Yeah, thanks, Aaron. I don't actually know who's on the line, but I'm sure most of you know me, so I'm a bit embarrassed by the lengthy bio. Before I start, just a big thanks to Aaron and Jill Laurent for pulling this all together. I'm helping out here, but they've done all the work. Before we start, though, one really important thing. Jill and Aaron and others just completed a 3-day workshop on RCMS RC14001 in Calgary. If you participated in that, I will suggest to you, you should probably hang up and move along unless you've got some questions, because you will not hear anything in the last hour and a half that you didn't spend 3 days diving into. So if you were left out with questions, by all means, get them to us and we'll address them. But this is meant as a quick overview for the people that didn't have time for that 3-day workshop. Okay. You'll see an overview here of what we're going to cover, and I'll just jump right into it. My objective here is probably take 30, 35 minutes to go through some of the material on the high messages, and then turn it over to any questions you have. So let's start by, and it's not scrolling again, sorry, Aaron. Let's start by talking about responsible care. Most of you, of course, will know this, but responsible care was founded in Canada in 1985 at another time when the industry was under a great deal of scrutiny and facing a number of crises. Our colleagues to the south, our cousins, followed in 1987, and while the American Chemistry Council is never shy about saying that responsible care actually started in Canada, most people in the United States chemical industry believe that it started with ACC and not Canada. That aside, since the U.S. came on board, responsible care has now spread to more than 70 countries worldwide under the auspices of the International Council of Chemical Associations. Working through the ICCA, and I had the privilege of serving as the chair of the process, we also put out a call to the chemistry industry leaders themselves, and we created something called the Responsible Care Global Charter, asking the CEOs of leading global chemical companies to commit to responsible care in every jurisdiction where they have significant business operations. And to date, we have 97 of the largest 100 global chemical manufacturers. Their CEOs have committed and recommitted to the Responsible Care Global Charter. And lastly, of course, never to forget to remind ourselves and our stakeholders, it's a condition of membership to belong in the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada. All of our members, all of our responsible care partners must implement and be verified or certified to responsible care. If we go back about 4 years ago, 2016, 2017 now, 2016 we started in our last strategic plan, CIC was hearing from a number of members that because responsible care has become a global commitment on behalf of companies, like I've just mentioned, and more specifically that it was the RCMS and the RC14001 approach that was really becoming a global standard. A number of our member companies were telling us that, hey, Bob, I have to do CIAC Responsible Care and I have to do verification to that. That's fine, but whether it's your requirement or not, my headquarters makes me do RCMS or RC14001 at my site as well. I have to do 2 audits to do the same thing, and man, there's a lot of overlap and duplication here. Can you help us out? And at the same time we were hearing that message, we were speaking to other companies that we felt really should be in CIAC and whose CEOs had signed the Responsible Care Global Charter, and they weren't in with us. And when we talked to them and tried to understand why, not the only question, the only reason, but one of the reasons they said why is because you're going to force me to do responsible care twice, once from my corporate office and once again for you. And until you make a change on that, we're not going to do it. So starting in 2016, we worked with the American Chemistry Council and our board of directors, and we agreed, we did a complete benchmarking between CIAC's Responsible Care and the American Chemistry Council's approach, and we'll come to talk about a few of the gaps in a minute, but by and large, these programs really lined up quite well. There were some differences of approach, some small differences in coverage, but they were very, very close. And so based on that analysis and through an agreement with the U.S. American Chemistry Council, a decision was taken that going forward, CIAC member companies could meet their responsible care requirements in a couple of different ways. They could either choose to continue to implement and be verified to the CIAC Responsible Care commitments, or they could undertake the Responsible Care Management System or the Responsible Care 14001 system of the American Chemistry Council. And as long as there was evidence that that system was being applied to the Canadian operations, and the Canadian operations were included in the scope of the certification requirements for that undertaking, we would recognize that as equivalent. And I'll come back a little bit later and talk about how many of our companies have done that alternative approach and what experiences they've had. But now I'll leave it at that. So under this MOU, companies, as I said, they can do the RCMS or RC14001. It is an ACC-based approach. That's why we had to have a formal agreement with them that allowed us to recognize that here in Canada. But there were some gaps, and we'll talk about those, that when you do the RCMS or RC14001 in Canada, you have to address some unique elements that are specific to Canada. And any of you that do other ISO-type management systems for health and safety or any other issue, you can think of these as your local significant aspects. These additional elements are Canada-specific significant aspects that must be included in your management system. So It's no different than if you have a health and safety management system and it's ISO-based, and the auditors say, well, what are your requirements in Canada, and how do you demonstrate you're meeting those? It's not in the material, but let me just pause here and give you one other piece of information, because I think unless you're already immersed in it, there is a little bit of difference about what is RCMS versus RC14001. When the American Chemistry Council started their approach to responsible care, it was through something called Responsible Care Management System. This is another management system. It is an ISO-like approach. But about 15, 16 years ago, a number of the large chemical global multinationals said, well, wait a minute. I already have to do ISO 14000 environmental management systems because I've chosen to, and or because my customers, especially in the automotive segment, are demanding it. I look at this RCMS and I'm seeing a lot of overlap and duplication, and I have to do 2 audits. Can't we do something about that? So the American Chemistry Council and its members said, yes, we can. We will give you a choice. You can either choose just to do the RCMS, or you can implement this new standard, which is basically the ISO 14000 environmental management system, plus the responsible care requirements. And basically, it's one management system, it's one audit, and at the end of that, you're recognized as meeting both your ISO 14000 and your responsible care requirements through one system and one certification process. The reality, I would say today, is most of the global companies, not all, but most of the global companies have moved to that RC 14000 approach. It makes sense for them. It piggybacks with all their other ISO type certifications, and they implement that at many, if not all, of their sites worldwide. Companies that tend to be US based and not have a broader global presence will typically stay with the RCMS itself. But it shows you, even in the US, there was this question several years ago about why are we doing the same thing twice, and can't we take advantage of that? Okay. Go ahead. Back up one. Just a quick word. Hopefully most of you are familiar with our current responsible care requirements in Canada, the CIAC Responsible Care commitments. There's 3 parts to this. There's the principles, the ethic and principles of responsible care. There's the system of codes, 157 different elements that are broken up into 3 pieces. The operations code, the things that you have direct control over. The stewardship code, the things that you influence, like your choice of motor carriers, suppliers, and other things, but what you don't fully control, you can influence, but you can't control. And then the accountability code, which governs your relationships and your engagement with external stakeholders who you must engage with, but really have absolutely no control over. So that's how those codes have been broken up in Canada. And then the third aspect of that is the whole management system approach. So implementation of these 157 code elements, these 157 significant aspects of responsible care in Canada are meant to be delivered through a plan, do, check, act management system. And all of that is done and is verified, we call it verification, every 3 years through an external process that involves non-professional auditors, and is certainly more subjective than an audit, but is fully intentioned, just like an audit, to drive continuous improvement and to demonstrate accountability to the stakeholders that what companies have committed to do is actually getting done. The system does not specify how to do things. That leaves it up to each of you as an individual company. It simply says, here's the 157 things we think you need to take into account as a chemical company operating in Canada. Unlike an audit, it's also not pass-fail. It is truly a continual improvement process. And as they look at those 157 aspects, as they look at your management system and how well or to what degree you're operating in accordance with responsible care principles, the verifiers are looking to see, are you doing exemplary practices and things that they can share that should be shared through CIAC with other member companies? Are you doing things okay, but they've seen it actually done better somewhere else, and maybe there's an opportunity to improve? Have you self-identified already that you know you've got a gap and you're working on it, it's a work in progress? Or is there an area of weakness here that perhaps you haven't been paying sufficient attention to, and they're asking you or advising you that you need to take corrective action? And that's what the verification does. In most cases, they leave saying the company has things well in hand. There's a small number of improvement opportunities that need to be undertaken. Leave them with you, and we'll follow up in 3 years when we come back. In some instances, however, and this is especially true where there's a change in management, where there's a merger and acquisition, where corporate locations change, the verifiers will pause and say, wait a minute. We see the management system, we see the implementation of responsible care being done correctly in most parts of the company, but there's some corporate attention has been focused elsewhere. We need it refocused on responsible care throughout the corporation. And then they'll enter into a review and revisit process where they will come back after 12 months, no more than 12 months, to see how those gaps have been addressed, and continue to do that process until they're satisfied and issue a completed report. And again, of course, that's very different than an audit, which you have a very limited amount of time to satisfy the auditors that you've addressed the discrepancies, the shortcomings that they've identified in their review. Hopefully you've got some questions. Just keep in mind this is always difficult to do, to talk for 20 minutes or half an hour without folks there. What does it mean if you wish to do RCMS or RC14000 in Canada? Well, it means you have to understand the technical specification. Again, if you're familiar with ISO, you know what that means. You have to understand the technical specification, and you must implement it in your operations in Canada. And that could either be RCMS or the RC14000. Okay? You do have to look at your other obligations, and we're going to talk about those in a minute, this short list of Canada-specific actions. When the CIAC board agreed that this flexibility should be offered, and in fact it should be celebrated, and this is a good thing, the one thing they were very cautious about, though, is they said, look, we've seen lots of instances where global companies and even North American-based companies and integrated companies don't actually have a single management system. So we think we can accept this, but only where there's evidence that the Canadian operations actually do implement and have been certified to these standards. So what they did not want is for auditors to go into US-only sites and US-only HQ and say, this is a responsible care company, and therefore it applies to all their operations in Canada. They said, we trust you, but we want to verify you. We want to make sure that's being done. So be sure to include the Canadian operations in the scope of that corporate undertaking, usually led out of the US. The other thing that we were able to, before I go into some of these specifics, the other thing that was agreed, and this helps the Canadian entities quite a bit. One of the problems we have, many of our companies have a single site in Canada. And so if you're a member of the American Chemistry Council, maybe pick on Cabot, they're a perfect example of this. I think there's 13 sites across the United States. They all do responsible care. They have a very large priced membership for the American Chemistry Council. Everything gets paid for through HQ. The sites may or may not be expected to pay for the audit, usually not. One of the challenges in Canada is you are separate business entities, and you're largely responsible to pay the bill for CIAC and including responsible care. One of the things we were able to negotiate with the American Chemistry Council was that since we have this obligation that US-based or global-based companies must include Canadian operations in the scope of that US audit, when they do so, how about you count those towards the total number of facilities that have to be reviewed in the US system? So for instance, a company that has 13 sites in the US, they probably have to demonstrate to the auditors and ACC that 6 or 7 different sites were looked at to reach the conclusion that this was a responsible care company. And what we've said is, okay, if they happen to come north of the border and they look at a Canadian site in Sarnia or in Medicine Hat, let's make sure that counts as one of the 6 or 7 under the U.S. requirements and for the U.S. pool, and they have agreed to that. So there's a modest cost savings there, whether that gets realized by your operations in Canada or the global company, the North American company, just spends less at their end. Either way, there's a small corporate savings from being able to count those Canadian audits towards the U.S. total. Okay. So as mentioned, just go back up one, sorry. As mentioned, when we did this benchmarking exercise, it included ourselves, CIAC, it included CIC members, it included representatives of the American Chemistry Council, it also included representatives of our verifiers and our national advisory panel. This was a big group. It took about 18 months to complete all the benchmarking activities. And when it did so, it did say, yeah, you know what? The Canadian requirements and the U.S. requirements do largely line up, but we see 8 things here, 7 at the time, and now there's 8. There's 8 things that are fundamental to the Canadian system that in some cases they're mentioned in the American system, but they're really not held to a high standard, and they're in some cases even, let's call it, slightly underlooked in the verification or certification process. And so the message from the group back to our board is, if you decide to go ahead and accept companies as meeting Canadian requirements, if they do RCMS and RC14001 in Canada, fine, that's understood, but you should require them to make sure that they do these 8 other things, and that those 8 other things are specifically looked at when the formal auditors come to do the audit at Canadian operations. So I'll just spend a few minutes on each of these 8 in the coming slides. The first one is TransCare. So is there TransCare in the United States? Transportation Community Awareness, Emergency Response? Absolutely. They do far more activities than we do. However, it's completely voluntary. You can be a member of the American Chemistry Council. You could have been a member for 40 years, and you've never had to participate in a single TransCare outreach activity. What we've always said in Canada is TransCare is a mandatory activity for all CIAC member companies, and it's a core part of responsible care. So you'll see on this slide, what does it mean to demonstrate that you have participated in TransCare? I won't talk about each of those, but it's something that the auditors are and should be looking at. They should be questioning you. Tell me about how you've participated in TransCare here in Canada, and they should be able to confirm that that is indeed the case, that you've done so, and if you haven't done so, then they should be issuing a finding to you when they prepare the report of their audit of your operations. Here's a second example again, and this is dealt with in the responsible care in the U.S. And in fact, any of you that operate high hazard facilities know that this concept of undertaking a worst case scenario analysis and communicating to the community, especially first responders, that's actually a legislated requirement for any certain high hazard facilities in the United States. We do not have such legislation in Canada, and the requirement is that all CIAC member companies, regardless of the risk profile, will undertake that worst case scenario and communicate as applicable and in accordance with the nature of the risk profile to their communities. And of course, we at CIC and formerly CCPA have many different documents to assist that. And of course, there's other documents from other organizations like the Canadian Society for Chemical Engineers and their Process Safety Management Division, and the Center for Chemical Process Safety. There's all kinds of resources there. Not for me to tell you how to do that job. But again, the auditors should be looking at your operations and must leave having confirmed that for your Canadian operations, you have, regardless of the risk, you have done that formal worst case scenario analysis, and you have communicated accordingly to your communities. The third piece, and this is important, we in Canada, perhaps a lot more so than the U.S., we unfortunately see a lot of transition in our leadership ranks in the chemistry industry. We have some wonderful people like Ed Beckberger and Pierre Ducharme from Olin, who've been around for many, many years. But even at our board level, we suffer a 40 to 50% turnover almost every year. And one of the requirements we have is that the leadership, the so-called executive contacts, will continually communicate their company's commitment to responsible care in Canada. And there's a few ways to do that. One is certainly to sign every year. We ask around this time, and Jill will soon be sending out the letters if he already hasn't. We ask the executive contactor to recommit that their company is committed to responsible care and tell us what they're doing about any gaps that they've identified already. And we expect them to communicate that recommitment to their employees and their local communities. We also expect the leadership of these companies to demonstrate that leadership through active involvement in the association, and especially the leadership groups where the leadership of the companies come together and talk at a high level about the state of the chemistry industry, the state of its safety and responsible care, and what they think needs to be done about that. So again, this is not something that you see as an expectation or a requirement at the ACC. It's merely a voluntary opportunity for those that wish to be involved. In Canada, it's a firm expectation, and again, the auditors should be looking for that evidence of leadership participation and annual recommitment. Wrong one. Right. Number 4. Next one. There we go. This is actually a requirement for the ACC as well, but of course it's a different country, it's a different association. There's different data that's collected for different purposes. Through CIAC, we have a number of data collection points, emissions data, health and safety data, water use, etc., where we collect it and then aggregate it for the purposes of communicating the industry's performance within Canada to our key government and other stakeholders. And you regularly get surveys that allow you to communicate that information to us, again, respecting confidential business information, but that allow us to roll that information up and tell a story on behalf of the Canadian industry. So it's expected that you have evidence that you've been providing that information to CIAC. There's also a few tools, if you will, where their use is mandatory. So things like the motor carrier assessment. It is expected, it's a commitment that every company makes, that you will have done a rigorous assessment of the people that show up to carry your product away. And of course, that's a risk-based assessment. That you're looking at the nature of your products, but you have taken a close look at your carriers and made sure you're comfortable with who you have hired, because it is in your control, who you've hired to carry your products on your behalf. Of course, if the company you've chosen as a responsible care partner, you don't have to worry about that motor carrier assessment. You can just hire them and assume they've met those requirements. But there are a couple instances where it's expected that, in addition to providing data, that you are regularly reviewing some of your key service providers. And again, the auditor should be looking at that. We're up to number 5. I think this goes back a bit to when we last updated our principles and sort of had this notion of sustainability piggybacked into or integrated into responsible care. It's there in the U.S., and that's why you don't have specific additional commitment to things like circular economy or energy efficiency or waste and resource conservation within these specific Canadian aspects. But we do expect that the company, as I've said, has this annual recommitment to responsible care and this commitment to sustainability, and they should be looking for evidence of that. Number 6, again, this is definitely 100% covered in the American Chemistry Council's 2 approaches to responsible care, RCMS and 14,000. You absolutely must have a stakeholder dialogue. I think the perspective, I can't say it's absolutely true, but the perspective is, in most cases, that's a pretty perfunctory review during the audit process, and it's more of a check-the-box exercise. I think when we go back 4 years ago when we did this benchmarking exercise, CIAC, our member companies that were involved, and certainly the verifiers in the panel said, we have a much higher duty of care and a much higher level of expectation for rigorous and rigorous stakeholder and community dialogue. It's done well, it's done routinely. Its performance and its effectiveness is measured, and there's corrective actions taken. It's not a, hey, I met with my community advisory panel 2 years ago, therefore it's evidence. So we have some guidance to assist with that. And interesting enough, this is an area where the U.S. has also self-identified some gaps. And as we speak this year, they have a number of tools under development, and we look forward to, let me say, repurposing those for our own benefit and sharing them with our own members here in Canada. But that's an aspect that, rather than just having a perfunctory tick the box, we do expect the auditors will be looking rigorously at how you conduct your stakeholder and community dialogue in Canada. And we especially expect that when they do so, they'll actually seek the views, which is not a requirement of the ACC processes, but we expect they will seek the views of the people you're trying to reach and have them comment on the effectiveness of your outreach and dialogue, and that should inform the conclusions the auditors reach in this area. I think we've said the same thing here. There's just more details on that. Let's leave that for now. We'll go to the next one. This is new. This is a set of commitments that the board approved last year, but has really have been almost 3 years in development. And if I go back 3 years ago, or 4 years ago, when I was the Responsible Care Vice President, I remember our National Advisory Panel said, "Hey, Bob, how come we don't include Indigenous engagement as part of the accountability code? We have all this talk now about reconciliation and roles and Indigenous communities as being distinct from other stakeholders and communities. Why didn't we talk about that?" And I said, good question. And I said, why didn't you raise that when you were sitting at the table in 2010 when we completely revisited responsible care? And everyone said, guess we missed that. And so the question I put to people is, if in 2010, when we did a complete and thorough review and update of responsible care, if someone at that time said, I think we should look at Indigenous communities as a distinct set of stakeholders within the accountability code, how would the members have reacted? Would they say, yeah, that's probably the right thing to do, or would there have been discomfort? And the resounding answer from the members is, yeah, we would have said yes, we would have pursued that, and yeah, we all missed that. Let's roll up our sleeves and get on with this. And it took some time, and it especially took time because we wanted to make sure we had some engagement from Indigenous peoples themselves to review what we were proposing and to provide feedback and, let's say, support for that. We did, and that work finished late last year, was reviewed by the board in October and approved, and went into effect in January 1 of this year. So as you go into your next round of verification for CIAC or certification for RCMS and RC14000, you are going to be expected to provide evidence that you have engagement with those Indigenous communities that are near your facilities, again, as everything in responsible care, as applicable to your operations. If you're Michelle Broussard's group and you operate the Kipling plant on Kipling Avenue in Lakeshore in Toronto, this is probably not highly applicable to your operations. If you're in Sarnia, it is exceptionally applicable to your operations. So that test is there. Companies that this doesn't apply to, they should make that case and say, well, we looked at this and it doesn't fit, but the expectation is you've considered it, and where appropriate, you'd certainly have a system in place to identify and engage with local Indigenous communities and meet these new tests, these new commitments that are in the responsible care codes. And finally, number 8, this is certainly a unique aspect in Canada. It's asked of softly in the United States, but they don't put much emphasis on it. We hear all the time at CIC, boy, we need to raise the profile of responsible care. Not enough people know about it. My employees don't know about it. And my answer is, we can provide you the tools and the collaterals to do it, but we don't reach your employees. We're very active on social media, but it's you, the companies, that have to raise the visibility and awareness of responsible care in your companies, throughout your value chains, with all your stakeholders. And that is a part of the responsible care commitments. In fact, it's in the codes in many, many different places. And we have developed some guidance over the past 4 or 5 years with the members to help you understand how to do that. But again, the expectation is whether you're verifying through the CIAC system or you're being audited through RCMS and RC14000, there's an expectation that the auditors or verifiers are looking for evidence that you do indeed promote responsible care by name. So those are the 8 additional aspects. I think there's been some confusion around that, like what does this mean and what do we have to do? And so what we've tried to do here, for those that have started to pay attention, that they have some choices about RCMS and RC14000, to get them to understand these are all things you've already been doing for responsible care in Canada. Just because you go to a corporate system of RCMS and RC14000 and you go to a US-based audit, you don't get to stop doing these things. You have to continue to do them because, again, in that ISO language, these are Canada-specific significant aspects of your management system. And that's what we're trying to remind you here. There's nothing new. There's nothing you're not familiar with. There's nothing that you shouldn't be doing because you've said for many, many years it's important. It's just to remind you that when you go down the audit approach and to remind you to remind your auditors, these are 8 things that have to be looked at. Okay. We'll press ahead a bit. We do expect, of course, for CIAC, we have a report and a format for that, and I won't go into, you should be very familiar with that, but we have suggested that the audit team, and this is being talked about with the auditors and ACC, that there is, of course, let me go back a step, sorry. If you do CIAC verification, you all know that for many years, your reports are made publicly available on our CIAC website, and you are encouraged to also make them publicly available on your websites, especially those of your local operations. And you share those reports with your employees and your local communities. That is certainly not a requirement of the ACC, and in fact, that's very unusual for an ISO-style report. The auditors do not write their audit reports to you in a way that they are meant to be publicly discernible and publicly shared. In fact, the exact opposite. What we have suggested, and the auditors and ACC have agreed, is there ought to be a very short, a 4 to 5 page report that they produce as a result of their audit and their audit report that can be posted on CIAC website, can be posted on your website, and can be shared with your stakeholders. And we give some guidance here of what that looks like, but it includes a very clear statement that the company did examine the operations in Canada and found that they do meet the responsible care requirements. And that did include looking at these, not 7, but now 8 other Canada-specific significant aspects. So that's something, again, that if you're going this route, you need to remind your auditors. We had a few instances under the last round of verification certifications. A few companies forgot about this and then were requested to go back. Always more difficult, always more money involved. Strongly reminding you that as you engage your auditors, you need to remind them, hey, the corporate audit report is important, but don't forget I need some short 3, 4, 5 page report that can be made publicly available and will be shared and posted by CIAC. Go ahead to the next one. There's a table here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but every company finds itself in different circumstances. So one of the questions that's been asked, if I summarize this page quickly, one of the questions that's asked is, okay, Bob, great. If I do ACC, RCMS, and RC14000 in Canada, great, they're going to count my audit towards the ACC pool. Hey, what if maybe I'm Urkel Worldwide, maybe I'm Methanex? What if I do RC Canada's responsible care commitments and I verify those at my U.S. operations? Will those be counted? No. The ACC in the United States will only recognize RCMS and RC14001 at U.S. facilities. They do not recognize Canada's responsible care system. So the good news is, again, if you do their system in Canada, you can count that towards your pool of audited facilities in the U.S. Unfortunately, they are not willing to accept CIAC implementation and verification at U.S. sites. You might have questions on this. You're welcome to post them to us, but this just says, look, we've tried to break up the nature of your companies, where you have operations, and what your various choices are. The expectation is, and it says here one site. I don't want to stress that. That's not actually the number. What it says is hey, if you've got significant operations in Canada, you should be looking at those just the same as you would in the United States, right? If you've got I don't want to pick on Nova, let's say, but let's say you're Nova, you have one of the world's largest petrochemical production facilities in all of the world in Joffre, and you have a significantly material and large facility in Sarnia. By all means, if Nova Chemicals wants to go down this road of doing RCMS and RC14000, it's pretty reasonable to expect the auditors have looked at both of those sites just like they would in the States. So, it says at least one site. What it's really saying is the minimum is one site if one site is appropriate. If you have global scale operations at multiple sites in Canada, you really ought to be looking at those here, folks. You can't just say, oh, I've got 4 or 5 global scale sites across Canada and I only look at one of them every 3 years. That's neither the intention in the U.S. nor here. So it's keeping in line with the spirit as well as the letter of the law. Okay. So I did mention we have had experiences to date. So we've made this optional for people, and roughly about a third of our member companies did choose to, rather than do CIAC verification, they did choose to implement well, in most cases, they were already implementing RCMS and RC14000, and in some cases they were already being audited to RCMS and RC14000, and just decided, you know what, we're not going to do that second CIAC verification. So roughly a third of our members met their commitments over the last 3 years by doing the RCMS, RC14000 implementation and audit. We polled those companies. Oh, and by the way, there were a couple other companies, BASF was a good example, who did both because they wanted to learn internally how do these Canada systems compare to the ACC and what are we going to do next time. So they decided to do both for now and then figure out what they'll do in the next cycle. So it's actually larger than a third, but that gives you an idea. We polled those 13 companies and asked them to complete a short survey. I think we ended up with 6 or 7 responses. Not everyone, despite multiple requests, not everyone got back. But here's a quick overview of what we heard. And again, each company was different. But basically, they said, we asked questions about, hey, when you think about how much time and how much money it took you to get ready, both internally and with your audit, how did that compare with what you used to do with responsible care? And they said it was about the same amount of time, and we probably spent slightly lower and slightly less money, slightly less time, slightly less money, but not material by any stretch. So then we asked them about the audit itself, and we said, hey, in most cases you had to hire U.S. auditors, you got the exchange rate, professional fees are generally higher in the U.S. When you look at the overall time to conduct the audit and the cost to do the audit, what did you find? And again, they said the same thing. It was about the same. Maybe it was a little lower, but not materially lower, and certainly not materially higher. It's about the same and probably a little lower. Then we asked the final question. When you look at overall your experiences with the RCMS, RC14000 implementation and audit versus responsible care, how did you assess the overall value for money? And they said, the exact same thing. You know what? It was about the same, slightly higher value for money because we spent slightly less time or slightly less money, but it was generally the same. So the real advantage here for most companies was A, I no longer have to do 2 audits, or B, I'm now fully integrated in my corporate operations and I don't have to do something specific to Canada. I can just put myself into that corporate RCMS, RC14000 world. And they felt good about that. We did ask also a little bit, well, what do you think should be changed? And one of the things they did say is, well, our advice to anybody else going this route, we probably should have prepared ourselves more. We weren't ready. In fact, we didn't actually understand these 8 additional aspects, and we forgot that we had to produce a publicly available report, and the auditors weren't really ready to look at these aspects even when we asked them because we didn't have the information on how they should benchmark us in these areas. So the message was we need to do more preparation internally with the companies and with the auditors. And CIAC and the ACC have heard that, and I'll come back and talk about that a bit in a minute. But generally, the message is positive support for this. And if you thought you were doing this to save a lot of money, yes. If you were doing both systems before, no, not if you were doing CIAC Responsible Care before, and now you're going to do ACC system in the future. You're not going to save a lot of money. Okay. So this is, I think the last few slides, no, that's all preamble, but these last few slides are the part where I'm hoping people really pay attention. So as many of you will know, throughout, since 1985, the approach in Canada to responsible care verification was on the 3-year anniversary, and every 3 years thereafter that you joined CIAC, you would be scheduled to complete your next responsible care verification. So today's March 11th. If I joined CIAC on March 11th, 1988, my first verification was March 11th, 1991, March 11, 1994, March 11, 1997, and so on and so on and so on. And the team here at CIAC would schedule and dispatch to you on, around, or about that date a verification team. That was the past. Now that we've had this experience, one of the other things that came up is, well, geez, you know, I kind of wanted to do that ACC approach, but geez, my company did it 2 years ago. They've already met the requirements up to 2020. I didn't do it with them. Do I still have to do my responsible care verification with you? Yes, you do. So they took that under advisement. But now the ask of us was that as we move forward, since we provided this opportunity, this variability, the choice, the request of us was to align our verification schedule with that of the American Chemistry Council, so that you can, again, be part of that pool and not have to worry about your requirements in Canada not being on the right timeline with the corporate requirements coming out of the USA. The USA, their approach all along has not been to do it the way we do it on the anniversary. Theirs is they take a 3-year chunk. They call it a cycle, responsible care certification cycle, and it goes 3 years. So the current cycle runs from January 1, 2020, and it ends December 31 on 2022. And you, if you're an ACC member company, you can choose any date within that 3-year window to undertake your responsible care certification. You could have done your certification on December 31st, 2019, to met the last cycle, and you could have done it again on January the 2nd, 2020, and you will not have to do it now for another 5 years until the end of 2025, because you will have done it during this cycle. So we're telling you the same thing. We will no longer be scheduling this for you. You must choose, A, which approach your company wishes to take in Canada. We're not going to tell you what to do. You have to choose, and you should tell us, are you going to do responsible care commitments and verification in Canada, or are you going to do RCMS or RC14000 with the audit certification and with the Canadian specific aspects? You choose. The second thing you do is, especially if you choose that latter approach, if you do choose to do RCMS, RC14000, you initiate contact with and you contract your own auditors. We do not appoint your auditors. That is just like all your other audits, your own business. And what most of you will do, no doubtedly, is integrate your RCMS, RC14000 audit with any other ISO type audit you do. If you do decide that it's in your company's interest to continue to do the CIAC Responsible Care commitments and to be verified to those in the traditional CIAC manner, you must tell us that, and we will work with you to schedule the date at the time of your choosing. We will no longer schedule those on your 3-year anniversary unless you tell us to. So again, the ball's in your court to do that. And it's really, you must engage your auditors. You must ensure they're ready to perform their activities in Canada, and you must ensure they're very much aware of the Canada-specific significant aspects, including the requirement. We should really, Jill, if you're on the line, we should make it requirement number 9, which is to produce the short, publicly available report after the exercise. You must do that. Then there's a couple of things I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you that you probably should do. You should take the decision on what way you're going to go. You should probably take that soon and not wait till 2022. And you should probably contact the auditors or contact Jill to schedule your verifiers really soon. If all of our 50 member companies and partners leave this until 2022, it will not get done. And I will tell you, in the United States, I go to their board meetings every February, and the February after the verification cycle is completed, the list usually of 10 to 12 companies that did not satisfactorily complete their requirements is communicated to the board, and the board simply says, please remind them again, give us the list in June of those that have not done so, and remind them that if they haven't completed by June, they will be removed from the membership. And there's no, give me more time, give me more room, I didn't get organized to do this. You've known for 3 years what you need to do. Not saying that our group is going to take such a hard line in the stand, but what I am saying is, again, if you leave this until late 2021 or early 2022, it's not going to get done, and you will be in a difficult spot. So whichever system you decide to choose, whichever approach you decide to take your decision soon. Consult with us, especially Gilles, if you've got more information you need to make that decision. Talk to others that have done both approaches. Take your decision certainly by the end of this year. Take your decision, and certainly by the end of the first quarter next year, get your auditors under contract or work with Gilles to schedule the dispatch of our verifiers to you. If you don't, you will not get it done within the required 3-year window. I mentioned one of the outcomes of our mini survey with those companies that have done the RCMS RC14000 approach was that it went pretty well, but we need to train people, we need to train ourselves, and we need to train our auditors better. We were very much appreciative of our colleagues at the American Chemistry Council and Gilles here in our office. They just did an incredible job. The ACC runs 2 or 3 times a year. They run responsible care workshops for new member companies and new personnel into existing member companies to familiarize themselves with RCMS, RC14000, and the certification approach. And they kindly agreed to come up and give a training seminar here in Canada, in Calgary, and to integrate with that our Canada-specific aspects. And that was done just 2 weeks ago in Calgary. We had about 27 representatives there, including the ACC, and it was a 3-day workshop. So that's my message earlier. If you think you're going to learn something in an hour that you didn't hear in 3 days, you heard everything that I've said in great detail. So that went very well, and the expectation is we are working with ACC to try to schedule another one in the Toronto, Ontario area for later this year. Gilles, along with our ACC counterparts, have actually also been very busy and aggressive in doing outreach with the US-based auditors, and some are like SAI Global, ERM, some are here in Canada, but largely US-based. And they've been having a series of webinars with those folks specifically to educate them on what they need to do and what they need to be aware of if they are in a position to come up and audit certified Canadian facilities. And to date, they've reached about 50% of those auditors, and those training workshops continue. I'm going to say one last thing about the U.S. approach, and I think it's really important that people, again, I'm sure most of you understand this, but if not, you need to understand it. Our verifiers that we've used are people who are experienced with responsible care, either because they've been responsible care leaders in their companies, or they've been through our national advisory panel or local community advisory panels and are quite familiar with responsible care. The auditors for RCMS and RC14000 are just that. They are professional, trained, certified auditors. The auditors themselves must be certified. And for both RCMS and RC14000, they're actually certified to the Independent Bureau of Environmental Auditor Credentials. They're not certified, they're under no control at all of the American Chemistry Council. ACC and its members developed the standard. They provide advice on what the certification requirements and the work of the trained and certified auditors are, but it's up to the Bureau of Environmental Auditor Certification, the so-called BIAC, to determine whether the candidate auditors have met the requirements, including time requirements for experience in delivering responsible care audits as a secondary or understudy before they can become formal auditors. So just keep that in mind, and that goes back to that message about, hey, there's only a limited amount of these people available. by doing the training that Jill and others are undertaking, we're trying to make sure we have as many of these people available to you here in Canada as possible. But it is a relatively small group of people that have seen a business opportunity sufficient to become experts in the field of responsible care. And it is outside of the control of both CIAC and the ACC. It is done through an independent organization, just like your ISO auditors are. Okay. So, oh, we went the wrong way. I think we're almost.
It does that.
And that's that.
Right.
So those are our comments. Again, thanks for spending the 45 or so minutes with me, and we're available at your disposal. Anybody that has questions, do our best to answer them.
Thanks, Bob. That was very informative and very comprehensive. So thanks again. It was a really good overview, and it was useful to help us understand what the new options and obligations are for responsible care. So we'll now open the floor to questions. There should be an option on the side tab to ask any questions if you'd like to type it in. If you'd like to speak, you can also raise your hand, and then I will unmute you so you can ask your question. So why don't we wait a little bit for anyone who has any questions. Okay, and we have a question from Liliana, and she said, I noticed that some slides had RC 14000 and some other ones said RC 14001. Is there a difference?
No, that would be me speaking non-carefully. Those of you who know me, I would never be an auditor, not a details person. I think Jill can correct, but I believe it is RC 14001.
That is correct.
ISO 14001. That's just me not being careful with my words, and I apologize. We will correct the slides.
So I have a question, and this is one that was asked when I think you presented this previously, or Jill asked when he presented this, and it was, to what extent is the data under performance metrics shared publicly? Is individual company data shared?
Yeah, so a bit of that is depends on the nature of the data. So let's start at the most publicly accessible. The so-called NERM data, which is really just a compilation of the information you already submit to the National Pollutant Release Inventory, and we aggregate that on behalf of the whole Canadian chemistry industry. That is made publicly available at the facility level because it already is through national legislation anyway. And we do identify for each of your sites or each of your companies an individual who could be contacted if they have more information, have a request for more information. I go down to the next level. I think of something like your health and safety data. Publicly, we only communicate that in an aggregate manner. Internally, within the CIC membership, the share network divides that safety data into so-called safety groups, depending on the size, the number of employees. And within each one of those, each company's performance is transparent, safety performance is transparent to its peers, both at the group level and the company level. That helps to drive, understand where each other's at and hold each other to account. That material is never made publicly available. Of course, pretty much everything else I can think of is only done at an aggregate level. The little bit of energy use data, water use, any business information, that is only communicated at the aggregate level because it's considered to be confidential business information. So you got a mix, depends on which data you're asking for, but if you have a specific question about a specific subset of that data, let us know, and of course the information's there. It's all done through, in the case of health and safety, these positions to make it publicly available or internally available, that's at the discretion of the share network, the members themselves. So that's the answer to that.
A question from Valerie. Is there an available list of RC 14001 auditors?
Jill, the answer to that is yes, and Jill will be able to tell you who they are. And he would also, I think, be able to tell you which ones have been trained in Canada already. Joe?
As a matter of fact, yes, I received a first list yesterday, to be exact, of those that have been trained so far, but I'm just compiling all that information right now, and we're supposed to go on till the end of this month for the auditors training, and I would have a better list by the end of the month as to everybody that has been trained and available to do the audit in Canada. So it's in progress, and everybody's going to be copied on that information.
Thanks, Jill. Next question is, who is responsible to seek an audit company? Do we need to go through ACC or CIAC?
Neither. You go to, just like you do for your other audits, you can look at the list that Jill has or that basically is available through the ACC too to keep that list. But just to be clear again, these are neither CIAC's auditors nor are they ACC auditors. They are people who have been certified as auditors by the Bureau of Environmental Auditor certifications. And we will have a list. You choose anybody on that list you wish. That makes your life easier than having to go to the BIAC and say, can you tell me who's RC qualified? We have that list for you, but definitely for you. Jill, anything else to say there?
No, that is correct, and that's why we're actually compiling that list of the auditors that are getting the training for the Canadian operations. And we already tried through BIAC, and they will not provide you with that information.
There you go. Okay, so Jill will have it for Canada or your corporate. You know, if you're doing this in a corporate basis, or let's say even a North America regional basis, and the intent is to include the Canadian operations in the scope of that audit, you folks here in Canada should be saying to your people, hey, when you're choosing your auditor, did you make sure that they're trained to do this in Canada? Have they looked at the Canadian aspects? If the answer is no, you want to get them in that training as soon as possible.
And that's why you will need to inform us ASAP, and we can rectify the situation.
So another question from Janice, will that list be posted on the CIAC website for later viewing as opposed to via email?
Jill?
I don't know. I guess I don't see no problem as to why not. I don't know if we're going to need some permission from these folks to actually do so, but I can definitely look into it and get back to everyone.
Yeah, let's look into that. I would assume if we do, it could only be on our internal so-called member link site.
Yeah, not on the
I
public site.
I don't think we'd be authorized to put it on the public site.
Okay, one more question, unless people have some more coming in. We don't want to lose our ISO certification. What is the best option?
Very clear. RC 14000. If you're already doing ISO 14000, in 5 minutes of looking at the RC 14000 standard, you'll get it, because it's all of the language. It's exactly the ISO 14000 standard, and then there's a call-out box in every element that says, for responsible care, you must also demonstrate X, Y, Z. So you'll look at that and say, oh, well, that's really simple. I get that. That'll line up exactly with what we're already doing. So if you are a company, and we've had this discussion with some of the new members who are just making this choice for the first time, and they've asked us, what should we do? And we said, well, or do you have other plans to do ISO type certifications? And they said, oh, yeah, we're going to do ISO 14000 environment. We're going to do 45,000 safety, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, well, then it's pretty obvious what you want to do to meet your responsible care requirements. You want to do the RC 14000 standard. And then especially, you know, I mentioned this before, the global companies. And I think here of the BASFs, oh my goodness, our good friend here, Doug Woods from Avonic, companies like that, they are imposing, even companies like Chemtrade here, which is out of Canada, have imposed the RC 14000 on all their facilities worldwide. And that's really why we've taken this partial step to say you could do CIAC or do these other systems, is to be understanding that the global industry has not only embraced responsible care, it's pushing it through all its operations globally. Well, we would have wished they had done so with the Canadian system, The reality is that's not what they're pushing globally. Methanex would be an exception. What they're pushing globally is the RC14000 approach.